You know, when you watch a Shakespeare play, you're not just watching a story. You're watching a kind of human laboratory. On those stages, characters are put under these incredible pressures, from family, from love, from society, and we get to see how they respond. It's this timeless question, really. What happens to us when life presses in?
You've probably heard this line from Hamlet a million times, right? To thine own self be true. It sounds so simple, but what does that actually mean? Especially when everything around you is demanding that you be something else. How does that self even hold its shape under all that pressure?
And that's exactly the question we're diving into today. We're going to look at the stories of three of Shakespeare's most famous women, Juliet, Ophelia, and Cordelia. And we're going to use a really fascinating psychological framework to unpack the different ways they each handled the immense pressure they were under.
Okay, so to do that, we need a language, right? A way to talk about these responses so we can really see the patterns. And for that, we're going to turn to a field called Transactional Analysis, which gives us some incredible tools for understanding what's going on beneath the surface. And it all comes down to this one central idea: autonomy. Now let's get one thing straight. When we talk about autonomy here, we're not just talking about being independent or doing whatever you want. It's something much deeper. It's about whether your way of responding can stay coherent, stay organized, even when the world around you is turning to chaos.
So what's in this toolkit we're going to use? Well, it comes from a psychologist named Eric Berne, and he came up with this really powerful way to observe and describe the patterns in how we all interact.
Bernie's big idea was that at any given moment, we're all operating from one of three ego states. You've got the parent, which is all our learned beliefs and values. There's the child, which holds our feelings and gut reactions. And then there's the adult, our rational, here-and-now self. And the really crucial part is that these are not personality types. We all shift between them all the time, depending on the situation.
So let's look at the parent ego state. Think of this as the collection of voices we've internalized from authority figures. It can show up in a couple of ways. You've got the critical parent. That's the voice of rules, structure, and shoulds. But you also have the nurturing parent, which is all about support, protection, and care. And then there's the child ego state. And wow, look at this. This is where our deep-seated feelings and our learned ways of adapting live. And it's so much more than just being childish. We can be compliant to get approval. We can rebel when we feel controlled. Or, if the pressure gets to be too much, we can even become fragmented. Just keep this chart in the back of your mind because we're about to see these states in action.
All right, enough with the theory. Let's get to our first story, Juliet. Her journey is all about intensification. Her way of responding shifts and shifts fast, escalating until it completely loses its organization.
When we first meet Juliet, she's the perfect daughter. She's operating from what we'd call a compliant, adapted child state. She does what she's told, she seeks approval, but then Romeo happens. And in an instant, that entire structure just falls away, and she shifts into this incredibly open, unguarded, expressive state. This isn't a calculated, careful response. It's a tidal wave of pure feeling. Her entire inner world has been rewritten by this one relationship. It's coming straight from that free child. But of course, that new world is threatened. Her father demands she marry someone else, and bam, she shifts again, this time into a rebellious child, pushing back hard. And as the pressure keeps mounting and her options disappear, her final tragic choice comes from an impulsive free child state, a place where overwhelming feeling just floods directly into action with no filter, no regulation. Her system just couldn't hold. So here's the key takeaway from Juliet's story. While she's incredibly responsive and can move through different ego states, her ability to stay organized and regulated just breaks down. As the circumstances close in on her, her responses just get more and more intense until they spin out of control. Her autonomy, her ability to hold her shape, it just doesn't get a chance to stabilize.
Okay, next up is Ophelia. And her story takes a very different path. Instead of escalating like Juliet's, her way of responding actually narrows and constricts until it finally just shatters.
Ophelia's entire reality is structured by her father, Polonius, who is this incredibly powerful critical parent. So her response is to become the perfect reflection of his expectations. She's a precise, contained, compliant, adapted child. She's totally 100% aligned with the authority that defines her world. There's no negotiation, no pushback, just complete and total compliance. From the very start, her range of responses is incredibly limited. She has one way of being, and it's perfectly adapted to her environment.
So when Hamlet rejects her, she doesn't find a new way to respond. She just adapts harder, suppressing herself even more, becoming over-adapted. And that's why, when the one person holding her world together, her father, is suddenly killed, her whole system just breaks. There's no organizing principle left. She collapses into a fragmented child, and her ability to think and speak coherently just falls apart.
So with Ophelia, we see autonomy just completely diminish. Her range of possible responses becomes so incredibly narrow that when the structure supporting her collapses, she has nowhere to go. She can't shift into a new state. Her way of responding just can't hold its form, and it breaks apart.
And that brings us to our final story, and in many ways the one that unlocks this whole idea of autonomy. Cordelia shows us a third path. She is our example of what happens when the response remains continuous and coherent no matter what. So the scene is set. King Lear demands this big public performance of love from his daughters. Her sisters, they step right up and play the part. They shift immediately into a performative, adapted child state, giving him exactly the show he wants. But Cordelia, she does something different. She doesn't comply, but she doesn't rebel either. She just holds her position. Now this is so important. This isn't rebellion just for the sake of it. This is what we'd call a regulated free child response. Her words are aligned with her inner reality. She's not trying to be difficult, she's trying to be integrated. She simply refuses to perform an emotion that isn't true for her in that moment. And this, right here, is the key. She gets punished terribly for this. She's disowned, banished, and eventually it leads to her death. But through it all, her way of responding never breaks. It stays steady, it stays proportionate, it stays consistent. That continuity, that refusal to either escalate or fragment, that is the very picture of autonomy. So seeing these three powerful stories side by side lets us pull all these threads together. Looking at Juliet's escalation, Ophelia's fragmentation, and Cordelia's continuity gives us a much clearer picture of what we actually mean by autonomy, this capacity to hold your shape.
So here it is. Autonomy isn't about being rigid or stuck in one way of being. It's actually the opposite. It's the flexibility to move between our parent, adult, and child states, while staying organized, aware, and connected to what's actually happening. This requires having our adult ego state online, that part of us that can observe and evaluate and then choose how to respond. Autonomy is really tested and seen in whether our core way of being can hold its shape through intimacy, through intense pressure, and through heartbreaking loss. And this brings that question from the dusty Shakespearean stage right into our own lives. It's a question not just for these characters, but for every single one of us as we navigate our own relationships and pressures. It's an invitation to just watch ourselves, to be curious. Can your way of responding, that essential part of you, remain intact and coherent, even when the world around you does not?